Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene introduced articles of impeachment against President Joe Biden today. Here she is speaking on the Hill earlier.
Biden. Joe Biden has deliberately compromised our national security by refusing to enforce immigration laws and secure our border, allowed approximately 6 million illegals from over 170 countries to invade our country, deprive Border Patrol of the necessary resources and policies sufficient to protect our country. And his administration has willfully refused to maintain operational control as required by the law. He has allowed fentanyl, the #1 killer of Americans between the age of 18 and 45, to overwhelmingly flood into our country and kill around 300 Americans every single day. These aren't just Americans, these are people's family members. These are their sons, their daughters, their brothers, their sisters, their mothers, their fathers, their cousins, aunts, and uncles. These are American families.
The fentanyl crisis is obviously a huge deal. So many very tragic deaths because of the high level of just like instant death when you take a substance that has fentanyl in it. The high degree of replacement of heroin is substantially just fentanyl. Unfortunately, I don't hear a lot of good policies for addressing this. The policies I tend to hear are, let's do the drug war harder. Let's go to war with the cartels. And how is that different? That doesn't actually squeeze their bottom line. That makes what they're doing more lucrative. The more prohibited it is. That's the phenomenon we've seen with, prohibition of every substance going back to alcohol in the 1920s. And then on the broader question of impeaching Joe Biden, over immigration policies, I mean, she's right that the border is a mess. We've seen the images of all these people coming here under unsafe conditions that unsafe for them because of the trafficking component and the journey and all that.
Yeah.
Joe Biden has certainly not done a good job of handling that issue, nor have any of his successors. So I don't really think or his predecessors. So I don't really think it's a impeachment offense. It's a policy that is not going well, in part because Congress has not done its job to fix the immigration problem by creating some way for people, a much easier pathway for people to immigrate here legally, and then coupling it with actual border enforcement so we don't have this problem.
Yeah, look, for one, it's interesting timing given that a lot of this debate was focused around Title 42. Title 42 lapses. Remember, it's a COVID policy. Right. Everybody wants COVID to be over.
Keep the disease out of the country.
Keep the disease out. If COVID is over, Biden agrees, Republicans agree, everyone agrees COVID is over. It doesn't make any sense logistically, but there was all this fear-mongering around it. Republicans were saying that once Title 42 goes away, we're going to have a flood of people over the border. In fact, we saw a decline in the week following Title 42 no longer being in effect. So the timing of this is a little odd. Of course, there's an issue with the border. It's confusing, though, just outside of criticizing what Democrats are doing, which I think there's opportunity for criticism there legitimately. So Republicans don't really tend to propose much in the alternative outside of building a wall, which has no relationship to actually stopping border crossings, or doing things like opposing the distribution of needle exchanges.
Trump didn't even build. It was the signature thing that he promised.
Right, he didn't build
a little part of it or
Although
something.
he said that he did build it at the town hall.
They built a little. They
a
put
bit
up
of
a
it.
Panel or something.
Sure.
I don't know. Yeah.
But Republicans are also opposing things like needle exchange programs and putting making Narcan and naloxone. The naloxone is the fentanyl life-saving.
Republicans are opposing that?
They constantly are pushing back against the mass distribution of those public health programs that are able to disseminate those kinds of life-saving treatments, and legalizing other kinds of drugs that aren't harmful, like marijuana.
There's an argument that
Biden also opposes that, by the way.
Should carry Narcan on them at this point if you live in the cities.
Maybe that is true. So it is frustrating. Also, of course, legislatively, this isn't going anywhere. So it does feel somewhat performative, but if she wants to make her strong feelings about Biden's border management known, I think that's fair. One other part of this is that there have been pushes by some conservatives to defund DHS. Part of why Biden has kind of limited focus on certain kinds of immigrants in the past is because of a funding issue. There's a kind of a triage situation given the crisis at the border, given the large number of people who are trying to cross the border, and so they decided to focus on certain kind of migrants. Well, if you want them not to have to triage, then you're going to have to potentially fund both the asylum legal processes at the border and DHS agents more broadly, and some conservatives are trying to do the opposite of that, so it's unclear what the thinking is.
Well, and the thinking here is, on this whole thing, is very backward because the cartels are powerful and they're money-making organizations. They traffic in illegal goods, drugs, and that humans being able to cross the border, that's a legal issue. Illegal immigrants are a commodity. Yeah. It's sad to describe people that way, but it's true, and they make money off that. So again, making these things even more criminalized is not targeting the cartels. It's making them wealthier.
Right.
So we have to think through that.
Right.
Like you're playing right into their hands because people are still going to try to get into this country. We can't have that not be the case. It's a great country. People want to come live here, work here, etc. And we've created a system, or we've deliberately, through our neglect, through our policy neglect, have a system where people are coming to this country in a way that is very dangerous for them and that empowers financially these cartels that everyone is so mad about, realistically, correctly mad about for their role in spreading fentanyl. Yeah. But then you need to create a safe, legal pathway. People can come work here, pay taxes. We have a labor shortage in many sectors. We can't build houses because there aren't enough work crews to do it. We could solve a lot of problems and actually undercut the cartels with a sane immigration policy. Please take that up, Congress. I'm begging you, please.
And most people agree with you, but that seems not to be the congressional priority right now. On another note, Greene also spoke out. This was an interesting story after Representative Jamal Bowman called her a white supremacist.
Calling a person of color the N-word, which should never happen, calling me a white supremacist is equal to that, and that is wrong. Jamal Bowman was down there cursing at me, telling me to get the F out of there, and he was leading the mob right outside the vehicle I was sitting in. We have this all on video. And then on the Capitol steps yesterday, he was the one that approached me. Even CNN reported that. Yelling, shouting, raising his voice. He has aggressive his physical mannerisms are aggressive, and he just recently shoved Thomas Massey just outside the House chamber. I think there's a lot of concern about Jamal Bowman. So, and I am concerned about it. I feel threatened by him.
Well, he shouldn't have called her a white supremacist if that's what occurred. I don't think that's a fair description for Marjorie Taylor Greene.
He has a right to call her a white supremacist, and people can object to it and think less of him or not vote for him.
She's objecting to it.
Yeah. But there's no, he can describe her politics and her views the way that he thinks is appropriate, and she can advocate, she can say that is akin to using the N-word. I think that if she thinks those kinds of words are similar in weight and meaning, that she should go ahead and use it.
What do you mean by that?
She should go ahead and say the N-word.
Well, but she's saying she was not, I don't think they're equivalent to, I mean, the raw ugliness of the N-word makes it very unsayable. But she wasn't saying it should be easier to say the N-word, right? She wasn't saying that saying it is a good thing. She's saying I felt maligned akin to.
If describing someone as a white supremacist is as serious, as ugly, and as unsayable as calling someone the N-word,
she was saying we shouldn't do that.
Right. Well, then we shouldn't be saying white supremacist. She's saying white supremacist out loud. I think, obviously, the ability for many people to describe things as white supremacists, including the Allen, Texas shooter, who was a self-identified white supremacist who was covered with Nazi tattoos. We live in a world where people like Elon Musk and many conservatives have, for some reason, been working overtime to make the case that this man, who they're not connected to and have no need to defend ostensibly, is not, in fact, a white supremacist. I do think that there is a way that the word white supremacist has been overused in today's discourse.
Yes, I've been called a white supremacist.
And I've been called a black white supremacist by Tiffany Cross, an MSNBC reporter. So I understand that the word has been overused. And perhaps Jamal Bowman overused it. I wish that we saw the context. If she has video, I hope that she releases it or it becomes broadly available, because I think that we should see that. At the same time, I think that it is obviously an apples to pears comparison. White supremacy is describing a phenomenon of people who believe that because of their race, they are better than other people. Oftentimes there is a genocidal underpinning to that. They want to exterminate other people. They want this to be a white country. They see this as it's white nationalism. It is related to the Great Replacement theory and the feeling that America is becoming a worse country because it is becoming a less white country. We have had people, including very prominent news reporters, talk about how immigrants are dirtier and poorer and ruining this country. And that is something that is, in fact, a white supremacist ideology.
We should call white supremacists white supremacists. We shouldn't call anyone the N-word. We should call white supremacists.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why the comparison.
Nick Fuentes is a white supremacist.
But that's why the comparison isn't apt, because one thing is describing an ideology and one thing is just a derogatory term for black people. So I just don't understand why one, in the context of pushing back against the accusation of white supremacy, would bring up the N-word at all. I would simply say, I'm not a white supremacist. I believe in the equality of the races. I think America is great because it's a pluralistic country. Those are all things that a person could say to push back against accusations of white supremacy.
I agree with you. Calling someone who is not a white supremacist is derogatory toward them, and you shouldn't do it. But it's his right to do it. I agree with that.
Yeah.
And they're not equivalent. I also agree. So. Yeah,
it's just a really weird. It's just a really weird place that we're in. I wish that Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she is trying to impeach the head of the FBI as well. I think that is a much more constructive move. I wish that there was legislation that was drawn up to defund the FBI, generally speaking, as she advocated for last year. I think that there are opportunities for defunding the police broadly across the ideological spectrum if people were willing to work together. We have Americans in the middle of an economic crisis that's very significant. We're on the brink of the debt ceiling crisis, where Republicans are trying to argue that we should make it harder for people to get food benefits while not touching any of our revenue issues with the rich being undertaxed.
And if you're a member of Congress, let's not sit on our thumbs and just be really angry about the influence of the cartels and what they're doing to this country without proposing a policy to fix immigration.
And I'll say this about Jamal Bowman as well. I don't think that he's threatening or at risk of actually attacking anybody.
I didn't see him shove Massey in that exchange. It was a very heated exchange.
Yeah. But I do think that he is performative and bombastic, and it's not helpful to his credibility. It doesn't advance the policies that he purports to support. He has a lot of energy around things like calling people white supremacists and not a lot of energy around advocating for policies like Medicare for all, which he claimed to support as he was getting progressive support to get into office. There are real crises afoot, including real white supremacist crises afoot, that you can make more credible arguments about and try to do something about from a legislative perspective. And I think that he has been very purposefully engaging in a kind of political pageantry that can be productive in some instances, but not if it's about kind of getting YouTube clips circulating about yourself, and that's not tied to any legislative agenda.
All right, we'll have more Rising right after this.